Boom! Welcome. Good evening. We're live. My name's Mark Littlewood. Welcome to this evening's IEA Book Club event. We have a great hour in store that will intrigue, entertain, stretch you, maybe perplex you, but I hope not. I think you'll end this hour a lot more educated than you were at the start. We have a tremendous guest, my good friend and a good friend of the IEA, Richard Koch, joining us to discuss his latest book, which looks at success and how, contrary to popular opinion, all of us can realistically achieve what he calls unreasonable success by following 9 key attitudes or strategies, and he's going to develop those for us. Before I introduce Richard, an unreasonably successful man himself, let me just run through a few housekeeping rules for you. If you're joining us on the Zoom side of the conversation and you want to ask a question, please put that question in the Q&A box, not in the chat. If you want to share links or opinions, put that in the chat box. But if you want me to put your question to Richard, put that in the Q&A box. We do have 5 signed copies of Richard's book to give away to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. And we will give those away to the 5 most popular questions. Even if you don't ask a question yourself, you can go to the Q&A box and give a thumbs up to the questions that you want me to ask. And being a democratic kind of guy, I will typically be putting to Richard the most popular questions. And amongst those 5, we've got a highly complicated IEA random number generator here, which will, like the National Lottery, pick out one of those 5 people, and you will be invited to the Richard Koch Gala Dinner, which is likely to be in the spring of 2021. We've got one space there to give away to you as well. Anyway, enough housekeeping. I hope those rules are clear. Welcome, Richard, dear friend of the IEA, good friend of mine, magnificent supporter of the annual Richard Koch Breakthrough Prize, hugely successful entrepreneur, investor, former management consultant, author, public intellectual, you name it, all-round polymath. Richard, of course, you've written many books. Probably the 80-20 principle is probably the one you're most famous for, that looked at how everyday people can achieve significantly more success with much less effort and time and resources if they just concentrate on the 20% of their life and work that yields the most rewards. That book was translated into 40 languages, has sold more than 1 million copies. And tonight, Richard's going to be talking about his brand new book, Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It, Unlocking the 9 Secrets of People Who Change the World. And there's 20 people that he focuses as real world changers, and he thinks they've all followed the 9 landmarks that he outlines in his book. What's interesting about this, especially for somebody like me, is Richard assures us that unreasonable success doesn't require genius, nor consistency, nor even all-round ability. You don't need to be a safe pair of hands. You don't even necessarily need to be basically competent. If you follow the 9 strategies and attitudes that he lays out, you can be propelled to new heights of accomplishment. And I want to ask him a bit about those and sort of what this means and what we can learn from it as people from a free market perspective. So, Richard, good evening. Great to have you with us.
Good evening, Mark. After that introduction, it's downhill from here, I think. Thank you very much indeed for all of that.
Well, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Why did you write this? Tell us about it.
I'll tell you how I came to write it. I was sitting on a train going from Paris to Lyon with a friend of mine. And as always on a train or plane or whatever, I need to have a book with me to avoid talking to people and looking at the countryside and all the rest of it. And the book I selected was an old book, which was Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. It's a dazzling book. It's a really, really good book. It's fascinating and it's quite moving in its way. But it presents a theory of success, which has been quite well taken up, I think. But the basic point he makes is that success is a function of having unusually deep and long experience in a particular area. And he talks about 10,000 hours of study or of experience in something as being necessary. And he gives a couple of examples, which are really good examples. He says the Beatles were just a mediocre high school band in 1960. But what really made them was the fact that they went off to the strip clubs of Hamburg. Well, the strip clubs of Hamburg, yeah, why not? But they had to play for 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. And John Lennon was quoted as saying, we had to improve because we had so much experience, and we might have been no good to start with, but by the end of it, we couldn't help having improved. And he also quotes the example of Bill Gates, who had an unusually privileged background because his school had a computer, back when no one else had computers, and he and his mates were able to play around with that and learn coding and all those things. So that's the theory which he presents. It's actually quite good as far as the examples he gives, but it doesn't apply to other cases of success. And so what I really wanted to do, I just put the book down and said, this is dazzling, this is really impressive, but it ain't true. At least it's not universally true. And what I said to myself was, would it be possible to construct a map of success, which really is true? And I said, nah, that's too difficult, obviously. I've always been fascinated, Mark, by success. Why is it that some people achieve far more than everyone else, when we all know they're not necessarily the brightest people in the world, they're not necessarily better than their peers who fall by the wayside and never really achieve anything? What could possibly explain that? So what I did was to look at 50 possible reasons or experiences that people might have which could conceivably explain that success. And then I took 20 people whose stories I knew about. Either I knew them personally, or more likely I knew about them from secondary sources, but I felt that I really did understand and understand why they'd been successful. And I looked at whether they had demonstrated each of these 50 attributes or experiences. And what I discovered was that there were just nine of those that were universally present in the 20 people that I actually studied. So would it be possible to construct a map of success that works for everyone, that works just as well for Leonardo da Vinci or Marie Curie, the discoverer of radium, or Albert Einstein or Bob Dylan, even Madonna, Helena Rubinstein and Steve Jobs, Paul of Tarsus and also Walt Disney, J.M. Rowling and Jeff Bezos, John Maynard Keynes and Otto von Bismarck, and so on. Could it also apply to people in the public sphere, such as Lenin? Could it apply to Churchill? Could it even apply to Nelson Mandela or Margaret Thatcher? Well, the amazing thing is, I discovered that it did work, that these 20 people all, I call them, visited these landmarks, experiences or reasons for success. And it was a really thrilling experience to go through that and to say, actually, I think, not perfectly, but I think better than anyone else has ever done before, I can explain personal success. And my motivation in doing this is not really to sell books, although please buy my book. No, it's not that. It's actually, I want to have many more unreasonably successful people in the world, because I don't believe that these people who were amazingly successful really, in a way, deserved it. I don't believe that it was, as you said, that they were so much better than their contemporaries. I think it's that they adopted the right strategies, mainly, or possibly partly anyway, by accident. They didn't actually know before they started what was a constructed attitude to take, but somehow they instinct or luck drove them in that direction. And then they were very, very successful. And my theory is, if you can write a template like this, if you can draw a map, which there is in the book, of saying, these are the experiences you need to have, these are the attitudes or the strategies which you can adopt, they are shortcuts to success. And God knows, we need many, many more creative people in the world. The world is enriched by people, and also destroyed, of course, if they're going in the wrong direction, but enriched, we hope, by people who are very creative. And it's this individualism which is focused and which is intelligent, which means you don't necessarily have to improve your performance. most of us go through life trying to do what we do better. It's a complete waste of time, because there are many, many hundreds of people, thousands of people, even millions of people who are competing with us, who are also trying to get better. What really matters is positioning yourself in a way that makes it unique and possible for you to find these shortcuts to success, even if you're not fantastically brilliant, even if you're not, someone who can put one foot in front of the other. I'm sort of thinking a little bit about our current Prime Minister, perhaps. Brilliant man, but totally incompetent. What you really need to do is to understand what these positioning things are. And so I'd like to say a little bit about each of those.
So you've got 9 of them, and I want to come to those points. But for those who haven't read the book yet, you pick these 20 people. And I mean, they're a pretty eclectic mix, right? I mean, you readily accept these are people that you knew or more likely knew of. So I guess they're disproportionately from the Anglosphere, they're disproportionately from the 20th century, if you would compare it across all the human race. But you've got St. Paul, you've got Leonardo da Vinci, Lenin. I mean, it's not all people in politics by any means. You've got J.K. Rowling, you've got Madonna, Bob Dylan. I mean, Walt Disney. I think if anybody flicked through this list, they would pick these 20 people out as having been colossally successful. But your insight before, and then I want you to talk us through the sort of what makes these people similar. What were the keys to their success? But your insight is essentially that Malcolm Gladwell is wrong, right? I mean, I think most people would think, work out your comparative advantage, whether that's painting or kicking a football or playing a guitar, repeat and repeat and repeat, and you will get better at it. And presumably to some degree that is true. If you are a footballer, practicing taking penalty kicks is going to make it more likely you'll score a penalty kick. And like you were saying with the Beatles, if you're playing the guitar every night, you're going to be better at it than if you just pick it up once a month. But you think it's mercurial genius in some way rather than hard work, application, or even natural talent. Is that right?
Yes, I wouldn't say it was mercurial ability. I think it's actually the ability to take opportunity when it comes along and to create a unique approach to dealing with that. So I don't think that Malcolm Gladwell is completely wrong. I mean, obviously, experience is terribly important. Obviously, mastery of a particular subject is enormously important. But you have to explain why. Take, for example, Churchill. Churchill was someone who had a very, very long career. He had a lot of advantages. His father was a dissident member of the Tory establishment in the later 19th century, Randolph Churchill. He had exposure to prime ministers who actually came and had lunch or dinner, luncheon they call it, of course, over the table, and young Winston as an equal. So he had a lot of experience. He went off and was a very successful soldier in the Boer War. He was a minister during the First World War. He was head of the Admiralty at a relatively young age. Later on, he became the Chancellor of the Exchequer and was well positioned to become Prime Minister in the late 1920s. But the man was a complete disaster. He always thought that oratory would propel him to great heights. And there's no doubt that he was a great orator. In fact, people used to say when he got up to speak in the House of Commons, they would all pour back from the bars and all around Westminster because it was great entertainment. But Asquith said, it's no use if you speak with the tongue of angels if you don't generate trust. And the problem with Churchill was that he was trying too hard to become Prime Minister. He was trying too hard to demonstrate competence. And he had the most appalling record of screw-ups. I mean, there was the Dardanelles, which in 1915, he actually caused the death of a huge number of soldiers and sailors because he had this harebrained scheme that you could you should sort of go around the Mediterranean and attack Germans from the rear, from Turkey or whatever. It was a complete fiasco. He took Britain back into an exchange rate which was far too high when he left the gold standard as Chancellor in 1925. He then decided that the resulting general strike in 1926 would call forth a really hostile attitude towards organised labour and the miners, which was counterproductive, and which the other Tories said, "Oh, we don't want to antagonise the working classes," and so on and so forth. And then he spent 7 years trying to fight a relatively mild matter of self-government for India, and he thought that Gandhi was actually, the devil incarnate. I mean, he went over the top. And so many things. He was always saying that everything was going to hell in a handcart. In one of his favorite phrases, that the abyss was always very close. And this man, was a total washed up failure in the late 1930s. But he got one thing right. Or you could say that maybe he was rescued by Hitler, who made him seem not the semi-comical drunk that he really was, but actually the saviour of the free world. Because Churchill got one thing right, which was that Hitler and Germany were a threat to the rest of Europe and indeed to the whole of the free world. And by putting down the marker which said, we shouldn't allow German rearmament, we should stand up to this, we cannot afford to let Hitler go and invade all these countries in Central and Eastern Europe. When his fellow leaders, or the people in charge in the Conservative Party, with a huge majority, were saying, well, we don't want to make the same mistake we made in the First World War, and we don't want to antagonize Germany. Maybe we treated them too harshly. And, there were loads and loads of the establishment people and writers like J.B. Priestley, the leader of the Labour Party, Lonsdale, who went over to talk to Hitler. And the leader of the Labour Party was absolutely delighted to discover that he was a teetotaler and a vegetarian. And he thought Hitler was Hitler was not a bad guy. And there were other
bit woke, but not a bad guy. Yeah.
Oh no, they didn't necessarily dislike that, and so on and so forth. People thought that what Hitler had said in Mein Kampf was just bluster, and he didn't really mean it. Whereas
but
Churchill,
Richard, you're making it sound to me as if Churchill, one of the 20 people who obviously is one of the most celebrated Brits of all time, was a sort of bumbling buffoon and just sort of struck lucky once. I mean, so what are the secrets to the success?
Well,
I mean,
the
if
point
a blind
is,
drunk man throws enough darts on a dartboard, he'll hit a bullseye eventually, right? Is that just what Churchill did? Just keep gambling, and eventually, the stars might align in a way that you strike gold.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. But the point is that it has to be something which is hugely important. And in May 1940, when Britain was about to be invaded by Hitler, everything that Churchill had said on other subjects was put to one side. And so people said, this is the only man that can actually rally the nation and the free world. And they were right about that. So yes, that's right. I mean, one of the 9 landmarks in the bookmark is one breakthrough achievement. And in fact, that is the most important landmark, because the others are how to do it. Things like self-belief, high expectations, distorting reality, making your own trail, and so forth. But the one achievement is actually the what, is what you do. Now, when you think about it, that one thing redeemed Churchill. And many of us spend our lives thinking that time is terribly short and that we need to do this, that, and the other, and so on and so forth. Well, actually, we don't. What we need to do is decide on one important objective that, if we achieve it, will change life for the better, or hopefully for the better. But in our view, anyway, even Hitler thought that what he was doing was for the better, but obviously we don't agree with that. But change one thing and it will make a huge difference. And you just have to do that one thing. I mean, in Bismarck's case, it was the sorting out of Europe into what he called tribes, because he thought that Europe in 1950 sorry, 1850. I get my centuries wrong all the time. I'm quite good at dates, but not good at centuries. Was a patchwork quilt of many, many different countries and many different principalities and so forth. Germany itself was something like 70 different states. And he believed that nationalism was going to be the defining force in the 19th century. And therefore, he had better ride that and reunite Germany.
Yep.
And that was all he wanted to do. And he did it by 3 very short wars. He hated war and all the rest of it. The wars were caused in the end, the critical war was caused by Napoleon III in France. But he seized that opportunity to unite Germany. And that's all he wanted to do. And after that, he was very happy to stay in power for 17 years, doing nothing, basically preserving the peace, doing a little bit of social reform, yep, education systems, and so on and so forth. So one objective during your whole life, if it's really important. But most of us don't think like that. We don't think, what can I do which is going to be hugely important and beneficial to the world? We don't think about that. Well, we should do. And
okay. But what I'm trying to get to is that, so, I mean, I want you to talk us through, because we're not going to, in this short hour, be able to go through the entire biography of Churchill and Bismarck and Thatcher and Lenin and the various other characters that you look at. I mean, that sounded to me as if you were saying it's sort of putting all of your eggs in one basket, or you might get that opportunity over and over again, but really real focus. Now, what I was interested in is you looked at all of these hugely disparate characters, from St. Paul to Madonna, from Nelson Mandela to Walt Disney, and you argue in this book that success is fractal. Now, I'm a humble guy from South London. I was very glad that you explained what fractal meant. That all of these people did have something in common. They were all different, but in the same way a coastline is different. Every coastline is different, but there are some remarkable similarities between coastlines. And your argument is that these 20 individuals all have in their life 9 landmarks, you call them, or strategies or approaches that are remarkably similar. What are they? What is it that makes Bob Dylan and Lenin remarkably similar, even if the exact inlets of their coastline and their careers are rather different? Talk us through.
Let me give you a list of them, and then perhaps you could pick one of them as being something I can elaborate and go into a bit more detail. The first one is self-belief. Now, this sounds obvious, doesn't it? Self-belief, you're going to believe in yourself, etc. And actually, nobody can believe in themselves in the abstract, except as a dreamer. You have to believe in yourself in the context of, I can actually achieve something. But self-belief that you can actually change the world in some way is necessary. And that cuts out 99.99% of people, because they never take life seriously. They never take themselves seriously. They never actually believe that they can change things. And therefore, I think it was Steve Jobs or an Apple commercial which said, the people who are crazy enough to believe that they can change the world are the ones who do. Well, it's such a small population. If you actually are really serious and say, well, what could I do? And where do I believe that I could make it? Me, an individual, not part of a big organization, could make a big difference. Well, that's essential to change the world. And, that is absolutely clear. No one has ever changed the world without self-belief, and very few people have self-belief. And I discuss in the book, well, what happens if you don't have self-belief? And I've got some answers to that, but I won't go into that.
So these, I just want to be clear, these 9 things are people that readers can pick up. You wouldn't just sort of say, well, I haven't got that, so I'm doomed. You can learn from this. It's not
absolutely you can.
It's prescriptive.
Yes. There are ways of getting self-belief, and many people that went on to do great things didn't start with self-belief.
Okay, so self-belief.
Yep. Okay. Secondly, Olympian expectations. This is Jeff Bezos's big thing that he bangs the drum on all the time. Basically, you have to believe in very high standards of performance, etc., for a team and so forth. And I see this in organizations all the time. I say to many people, you've got to have an A team. You've got to have people who are really, really super, super good. So they're in the top 1% of their peers and the rest of it. But you haven't got to just have one of them, you've got to have a team of them, and you've got to have the whole organization composed of 8 people. And they say, oh no, we can't afford that. Oh, it's unrealistic. Well, yeah, sure. That's why one of the reasons Amazon has been so successful is that Bezos is so uncompromising about those high standards. Anyway, Olympian expectations.
Of your team, of your workmates, of your colleagues.
Of yourself, first of all, Mark, of yourself, and then of the team. And then there's one transforming experience. It was a real thrill to me to see when I looked into these people's lives, and I hadn't looked in detail at some of them, that they all had a transforming experience. Something happened to them. It could have taken, in the case of J.K. Rowling, it took about 4 hours. In the case of other people, it took many years. Typically, it would take about a year. But when people went into this transforming experience, they were different people from what they were when they came out of this. And somehow they'd acquired some rare knowledge, or they'd had some confidence boost, which was mega. You know, it wasn't a question of, oh, I'm a little bit better. They were different people, totally. Absolutely different people.
What was, sorry, I've got to stop you there. What was J.K. Rowling's 4-hour Road to Damascus experience? I mean, I know what St. Paul's was. I don't know whether it took 4 hours or less, but what was J.K. Rowling's 4 hours?
It was on a train. It wasn't the road to Damascus. It was a train from Manchester to London, and it broke down. And she had nothing to do but stare out of the window. She was a very shy lady, and she didn't like talking to other people. She had not taken a pen and paper. She had not taken a book or a magazine. So she stared out the window, and then suddenly, in her mind's eye, she saw what was later described as Harry Potter. She said, I saw this scrawny little school kid who did not know that he was a wizard, but he was on his way to a school of wizards. And it was like a download. You know, it came from nowhere. It came from the unconscious mind, or I don't know where it came from. She didn't know where it came from. But she said she saw in her mind's eye not only Harry Potter, but also his other companions, the school, and so on and so forth. And she was so excited by this that when she went back, when the train eventually restarted 4 hours later and made it to London, thank God for British Rail. It wouldn't happen these days. No, train stopping for 4 hours. No, she actually wrote down all of that stuff.
And that was then the basis of the Harry Potter.
It took us 5 years to write the book. Okay. So you could say, in a way, the transforming experience took 5 years.
Yeah,
or it took 4 hours. But,
all right, so those are the so self-belief, Olympian expectations, some sort of experience.
One breakthrough achievement I talked about earlier. That's the what, not the how. What are you going to do with life to make things different? Make your own trail, do something unique, develop a unique philosophy. And then this is very interesting one. Find your own personal vehicle. Now, you know, you and I are individualists, I think, and we believe in individualism, but there's a very interesting tension or dynamic between individualism and collective effort. And finding your personal vehicle, all of these people had personal vehicles of one sort or another. For some people, it was a university. For other people, it was the respect of their scientific peers. For other people, it was organizations and so on and so forth. For the statespeople, it was statesmen and stateswomen. It was usually a political party or the state. It's a collaborative achievement which vastly increases the power of the individual, but is subordinated to one person's will and vision. So it's a vehicle for an individual which makes them hundreds or thousands or millions of times more effective.
But that needn't be an institution, right? I mean, that could be a political party, or it could be inventing the world of Harry Potter.
Exactly. It could be that. It's something which makes you so much more powerful. And it's often imaginative, as you say. Or you could imagine a virtual community of people who follow that particular line. I mean, one of the people in the book is Viktor Frankl, who was sent to Auschwitz by Hitler, probably the first existential philosopher. And the thing which he did, which resonated hugely after he left the concentration camp and went lecturing, was he believed that Freud was wrong and that Adler were wrong. Freud said everything is all about the will to pleasure, and particularly sex. Adler said everything is all about the will to power. And Frankl said, much more contemporary view and useful view, I think, it's all about the will to meaning. People need to find some meaning in their life. So this guy was sent off to Auschwitz. All of his possession, he'd almost written this bloody book, which he thought was going to change the 20th century. And he eventually published it called Man's Search for Freedom. And when he went to Auschwitz, obviously everything was taken away from him, the book, the possessions, and all the rest of it. So he decided, well, you know, I better eat my own medicine here, swallow my own medicine. You know, here I am, you know, I'm sort of, you know, I've got no possessions, you know, I've been lucky to survive. It's hell. But I want some meaning in life. So what's the meaning? The meaning for him was to write down on little scraps of old cigarette packets and little bits of paper, the ideas that he had in the book. And then he visualized himself after leaving the concentration camp, lecturing to large crowds of people in America and Europe about his theories. And it was that kept him alive and gave him meaning in hell. And I think it's so beautiful because it was his own existential philosophy, which said that circumstances can be terrible, but it's your reaction to circumstances that really matters. That wasn't an original idea. There were Greek philosophers who had that idea.
So that's a thrive on setbacks. That's the seventh.
Yeah, that's another part of it. Thrive on setbacks. People misunderstand this. There are lots of people who are very resilient to setbacks. So, you know, you have a big failure and you say, oh, it doesn't really matter. And you have another failure and you say, oh, well, I can do something else. That is not thriving on setbacks. Thriving on setbacks is turning them to your advantage or realizing that they are very helpful. And they can be helpful in a couple of ways. One is they give you feedback. You know, you say that, you know, for Mr. Churchill, that, you know, don't rabbit on about Indian independence. It's not going to get you anywhere, Gov. You know, so, you know, it can be that kind of feedback, or it can be just a simple thing which says, you know, you've had this massive failure, but massive failure is often followed by massive success. So actually, it's quite positive. You know, it's a way of I don't know. It's a way of fooling yourself, or if you're more constructive about it, of instructing yourself in what can be important. And setbacks are the essence, I believe, of the free market. They're also the essence of life. You know, nobody goes through life without setbacks. The question is how you react to them and whether you turn them to your advantage. Yeah.
Right. Thrive on setback. Acquire unique intuition is your penultimate one, and then distort reality. Tell us about those two. Acquire, and then there's one I want to ask you about the transforming experiences a bit more. Acquire unique intuition. How the heck do you do that? Read tarot cards or something? What's that mean?
A lot of people think that intuition is a random thing. It's not. Absolutely not. In the quality of your intuition, which comes from the unconscious mind, is actually the quality of your understanding of a deep subject, without necessarily realizing that you understand it very well. So I just believe that you need to have deep, narrow knowledge. And this is a sense that perhaps I agree with Malcolm Gladwell about something anyway, that knowing a lot about very little can be hugely valuable. But you have to use that intuition. One of the interesting things, one of the reasons I call it unreasonable success, and there are 4 reasons there, but one of them is that the achievements of all these people, from Einstein to Marie Curie to Churchill to Thatcher, they were actually intuitions based on nothing rational. There was no proof that they were important. Paul of Tarsus, above all, having this bizarre vision of the living Christ, you know, you think he was completely mad, and perhaps he was mad, but it was very, very powerful. So it's that kind of thing. And most of us block out our unique intuition. We just don't realize that that's what we need to find.
And then your last one is distort reality. I mean, as a major fan of Doctor Who myself, this sounds very appealing, but how am I supposed to do that without my TARDIS or space gun or warp field or whatever?
Well, it was actually, you're right, it was something that came from Star Wars. Was it Star Wars, or was it the sci-fi thing. Anyway, it was an episode called The Menagerie, I think.
Well, that's Star Trek. That's Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
It's a capital offence to confuse Star Wars and Star
no,
Trek,
it is.
Richard. You've got to be very
Forgive
careful
me,
on
I've lost all credibility in Star Trek. Yeah. So Steve Jobs, for example, was a great fan of Star Trek. Anyway, there were these creatures who were able to change reality just by thinking. So they just basically sort of radiated thought, and that wall over there that looks quite solid suddenly would disappear. But actually, to me, it's just a metaphor which says you're defying conventional wisdom. And I see it as the individual trying to create something new against the inertia of community and culture. Because what is reality other than what we have always done and what we accept as being inevitable? So distorting reality is really another name for doing something new. But it's the having the confidence to believe that you can do that, that basically there is a solution. You don't know what it is, but somehow you'll go around it, you'll go under it, you'll go over it, and you will defy reality. Most people do not do that. Most people accept that the constraints which are there are realistic.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Now, what you said I should focus in on one of them. So the 9, just to remind people, which we run through, along with the biographies of a number of the key 20 characters that you focus on: self-belief, Olympian expectations, transforming experiences, one breakthrough achievement, make your own trail, find and drive your personal vehicle, could be an institution, could be a concept, thrive on setbacks. That's not just about resilience, that's actually about sort of really properly learning and require unique intuition, distort reality. Well, but before I just ask you about transforming experiences and then move to the questions, and I should remind people, if you want to ask a question, put it in the Q&A on Zoom, and if you like the questions, upvote them. The top 5 will get a signed copy of the book. Are these things, Richard, and perhaps I can focus on the transforming experiences, are these things that you can go out and get, or are they just things that happen to you? I mean, I haven't had a vision of the living Christ on my wandering towards Damascus, and neither do I have some wacko view about a child wizard on the many times I've been on a broken down train. How do I manipulate the world around me in order to make sure these things happen to me? Or is it just dumb luck?
Oh, well, it's both of those. I mean, it's a very important point that none of these people actually planned, none of the 20 people planned their own transforming experience. It happened to them. But once you realize that one of the things which made them so effective and so powerful was a transforming experience, then you say to yourself, well, have you, Mark, have you had a transforming experience? Have you ever worked for an organization, or have you ever had an experience where you went into it and then a year later or 2 years later or however long it was, you were a completely different person? It could be going to university, it could be joining a firm, etc., etc. Have you ever had that?
No.
Okay. Then I say to you, Mark Littlewood, you bloody well, if you really want to be unreasonably successful, you better have one of those, and you better start working out how to have one and look at the possible range of things.
And what I do that by what? Putting myself in a wide range of varied, unusual situations? How do I
maybe just one? Maybe let me give you some examples of people who had very interesting experiences which they did not plan, but in a way they could have done. So one of my mentors in life was a guy called Bill Bain. He founded, no one's heard of Bill Bain. He founded Bain and Company, which was...
Bain and Company's famous. People have heard of it.
It's famous, yes. Okay, all right.
Mitt Romney used to work for Bain, right?
Exactly, yes. Okay, exactly. It's one of the top 3 consulting firms in the world. It's one of the firms I worked for after BCG fired me. So Bill Bain started life as a history researcher. He loved history. He went to Vanderbilt University, Tennessee, and he basically, all he wanted to do in life was be a historian. Very boring, perhaps, but he loved it. And then he's tried doing research, and many people who've done history research or any form of research know it's balls aching, and it's really, it's not very exciting. It's very lonely, and it's not even intellectually stimulating, because most of the time you're just doing research which a monkey, intelligent monkey could do. So after a year of doing history research into his PhD, he decided to throw it in, and he was very lucky because what he managed to talk himself into was a role in the development office of Vanderbilt University. Now, development, I don't know, most people don't know what a development office is. It's begging for money from alumni. And
very similar at the IEA, I should say. It's exactly what our development department does here. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, yes. And it's not much fun. Anyway, but for him, it was fun, because he, far from being stuck in the stacks of the history library, what he actually did was to go and talk to the most successful people who'd been to Vanderbilt University. And there were quite a few. The head of Chemical Bank, the head of the Bank of New York, Kodak, the head of Kodak had also been there. And basically, he found a great affinity with these, these powerful, rich people on Wall Street and in New York corporate life. And he actually really said, I want to be part of this life. These guys are no smarter than me. They're making lots of money. And, I can charm them. I can talk to them about women, or I can talk to them about business or sport, or he was a huge basketball fan, And so that gave him the view that he could actually work in that world. And then the thing which really transformed him was meeting Bruce Henderson. Bruce Henderson had also been an alumni of Vanderbilt. And then he founded the Boston Consulting Group. And the Boston Consulting Group was very, very good at having ideas, and very hopeless. And Bruce in particular was very hopeless at selling them, because he would go along, if you, Mr. Chief Executive, he would go along to you, and you would say to Bruce, well, tell me what you can do, Bruce. And then he would go into a long, rambling speech about long-term planning, and the guys were, it was awful, and so on and so forth. And he was smart enough, Bruce, to realize that he was a bad salesman, and what he really needed was someone to help him sell business. And Bill Bain came along to Bruce and with his begging bowl out and say, will you please give money to Vanderbilt? And Bruce said, well, no, actually, I'm not very interested in that. But why don't you come down to Boston and talk about, maybe coming to work for the Boston Consulting Group? And what he did was he laid on all of their top vice presidents within BCG. He said, talk to Bill Bain. I think he might be a good guy to hire. Bill Bain had never done a business degree, knew nothing about economics. He'd done nothing quantitative or whatever, but he was a really bright guy, and Bruce saw potential. I mean, one of the things that Bruce Henderson was absolutely marvelous at, which very few people have gotten, it's a matter of intuition, is he had great talent for spotting talent. And, I think that's hugely important. There are some people who are absolutely brilliant at everything, but they are terrible judges of people. Bruce Henderson was the other way around. Anyway, at the end of the day, I love this story. At the end of the day, he asked each of the vice presidents to write up an appraisal of Bill Bain. And basically what they came up with was, this guy's really bright, but he knows nothing at all about business. And, lots of people are bright. Priests, for example, lots of priests who are really bright, but you wouldn't hire a priest, would you? So no, I mean, this is a really stupid idea, Bruce. Tell him to go back to Vanderbilt University, and good luck to him. And at the end of the day, Bruce gathered together these bits of paper that the vice presidents had written and signed personally, and he showed them to Bill Bain. He said, what do you think about these assessments? And Bill said, well, they're probably right. And Bruce said, well, I don't think they're right. I'm going to hire you. And then, within a year, Bruce had divided BCG into 3 different firms and put, against everyone's opposition, put Bill Bain in charge of one of those thirds of the company, profit centers, essentially. And that third of the company was making far more money, far more revenue than the other 2 put together. So Bruce was vindicated in that. And that was a transforming experience for Bill, because he absolutely took like a duck to water to Boston Consulting. He loved the concepts. He helped to invent the Boston Consulting.
But again, just dumb luck, wasn't it? Dumb luck.
It was just absolutely, it was just dumb luck. But, what dumb luck do you, Mark Littlewood? You haven't had a transforming experience. Well, put yourself in the path of luck. Try and work out how you could conceivably have that kind of experience.
Well, I'm a Southampton FC fan. We never ever get any dumb luck going our way. Richard, look, we've been talking for 45 minutes. There's lots of questions coming in. It's not too late for you to put your question in. I want to come to those in a moment. But
can I just say one thing? On the transforming experience, the prime example is Jeff Bezos, because Jeff Bezos was a failed investment banker, 26 years old. And he decided to leave Wall Street. He hated Wall Street. He hated all those people. A headhunter sent him off to meet David Shaw, who ran a quantitative hedge fund, which David Shaw had realized how important the internet was going to be. He was a former computer science professor. And he and Bezos got on really well. And it was in D.E. Shaw and Company that he was asked to do a project on working out how things could be sold over the internet. And Shaw and Bezos worked out the blueprint, absolutely the blueprint, including the first product books, for Amazon. And if Bezos had not had that transforming experience, we would never have heard of him. And similarly, Leonardo da Vinci was, when he was 14 years old, as someone who had no education at all, his father, who was a notary, managed to get him apprenticed to the workshop of the artist and engineer Andrea del Verrocchio. And it was a fabulous experience. And if Leonardo had not had that experience, we wouldn't have had the Mona Lisa. We wouldn't have had the Last Supper and all the rest of it. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, well, but before I come to the questions, I'm conscious of time here, and you're doing a great job of shoehorning in the life stories of 20 of the most amazing people that you've ever come across. But I wanted to ask you a narrow question. You picked Keynes as the economist. I mean, I don't take umbrage at that, but you picked Keynes, not Hayek.
You do. You don't like it.
I do. Actually, no, you're quite right. I do. I just lied there. It was a barefaced lie. You picked Keynes, not Hayek or von Mises. Why was he your choice of economist in your? Because
he had the most world effect, and also because he rescued the free market, essentially. So you don't like Keynes, but actually,
no, I don't. I don't.
If it hadn't have been for the general theory of employment, interest, and money in 1936, which said, when you're in a depression, the government needs to spend money in order to generate demand, because otherwise you just go down, down, down. When things are okay, the government should withdraw to the sidelines. And the great threat in the 1930s, the two great threats, were fascism and communism. And although they were antagonistic to each other, they were really twin cherries on a single stalk, as far as I'm concerned. Everyone thought the future was either going to be fascist or communist in the 1930s, all the intellectuals and a lot of the public and all the rest of it. And Keynes was the one person who said, no, the free market can be reformed. It's not a matter of having mass unemployment under the free market. You can actually have full employment under the free market.
Okay, and well, Richard, I'm going to send you a free copy of some of Hayek and von Mises' criticism of that approach. But that's for another seminar. I want us to move on to some of the questions that have been asked and voted towards the higher end. My apologies if I mangle people's names. Nishkal Dunghel is the top voted question. He says the Dunning-Kruger effect states that there is a tendency for people to misjudge their abilities, i.e. people with less than average abilities tend to overstate or overestimate their true abilities, while those with higher than average abilities tend to not realize how much better they are. Everybody sort of, there's a kind of everybody moves towards the mean or the median in their own head. Is it because of the misjudgment of their abilities that people are unsuccessful? Does Richard Koch's book help people overcome this effect to become successful? Does everybody think they're average, whether you are or whether you aren't?
Yes, actually, I don't think it really matters for it. I mean, I agree with the question and I agree with the effect and the rest of it. I just think people should not worry about that. It doesn't matter whether your IQ is 100 or 110 or 150 or 170. If it's 80, then you probably do have a problem. You're probably not going to achieve something that's going to change the world. But the real thing is to focus on doing something that no one else can do. And that's not a matter of ability. It's not a matter of intellect. It's a matter of being focused on that. And it's a matter of believing that you can do it.
Okay. Andrew Mina, good to have you with us, Andrew. Long time supporter of the IEA, comes to a lot of our events. This is a really interesting question. Can we consider a counterfactual case? Which of the special 9 landmark factors was missing for someone like Hitler or Stalin? I mean, you might actually consider Hitler or Stalin to have been very successful people, wicked and evil, but nevertheless successful. But I think that's a really interesting case on the counterfactual. There's some people who've got sort of 6 of the landmarks. Maybe I've got 6, but I've never had this transforming experience you're trying for me to get, or I've never done one of the other things.
It's a great question. I have to tell you, the publishers will probably, they'll hate me and they'll probably start burning the books and all the rest of it. But Hitler was in the book, actually, and he fulfilled all of the 9 criteria. Let me tell you about Hitler's transforming experience. Hitler's transforming experience was the First World War and the immediate aftermath of the First World War. There was a social revolution in Munich in November 1918, and basically a lot of the army people supported that. It was ruthlessly suppressed by the by the generals, not only in Bavaria but also in the whole of the Republic. And what they decided was that they needed to re-educate the troops, because a lot of the troops had actually been Red Guards, and they were really worried that this was a source of vulnerability because the army could no longer be relied on. So they developed a program of propaganda, essentially, which was a mixture of German nationalism and anti-Semitism and all that sort of anti-communism. And one of the people they selected as being it was actually one of 16 people who were the political instructors in the army, was our friend Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler, who had never ever achieved anything in his 28 years or whatever up to that point, who had been unemployable, who had been a complete effing disaster in everything, even when he was in the First World War, was viewed as being not leadership potential.
He was a failed artist as well, wasn't he? He was a failed artist.
He was a failed artist. He was rejected by the Academy of Arts in Vienna twice, and he hated them. And then after that, it was just he hated Jews and he hated everybody. But Hitler took to this political instruction stuff, particularly the horrible, evil, vile stuff that they were putting out. And he was better at it than anybody else. And for the first time in his life, he'd actually got praise. For the first time in his life, he actually believed in what he was doing, and other people thought, this guy's amazing. And his sergeant major, who actually went to one of the speeches that Hitler was giving, said, I could not believe that this was Hitler. Hitler was shy. He was not one of the boys. He was just basically a complete loser. And yet everyone is saying the man really believes. And that was the making of Adolf Hitler. Now, Adolf Hitler, obviously was a terrible, terrible, terrible person, as indeed I believe Lenin was. But he had his transforming experience. He had his self-belief recreated as a result of that. He believed that you could distort reality and blah, blah, blah. He fulfills all of the 9 criteria, and I think Stalin would as well. So, but the counterfactual question is a good question. Why was, I don't know, why was Rab Butler never prime minister in Britain, for example? Or, why did Mitt Romney never become president? It's a good question.
Yeah. Okay. I should also encourage those who are on the Zoom side, please keep voting. Otherwise, we're going to have an incredibly awkward tie, because we've got a whole load of questions that have been upvoted 3 times. And although I promised that the IEA's random number generator computer is pretty flawless, it can't deal with ties. So get in there and
I think what you need is a die, basically.
So the Daniel Verin asks, as Churchill once said, and this goes to your thriving on setbacks, I think, as Churchill once said, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. How did the people you've studied overcome blunders to reach eventual success? So that's really asking about that particular thing. You mentioned it's not just a question of resilience, it's thriving on it.
Yeah, I do discuss that in the book. And after his terrible disaster, not only in the Dardanelles, but also before that, he went to lead a troop of people trying to defend the port of, what's the main port in Belgium? Can't remember. But anyway, he went actually and took charge of this thing. And again, it was a complete and utter fiasco. So after that, what he decided to do was to withdraw from politics and go and work as a soldier on the Western Front, believe it or not. And for 6 months, he went and worked as a relatively junior soldier outside the world of politics. He really enjoyed that, and he'd been a soldier before, so it was fine. It was absolutely fine. And then after he failed to become prime minister in the late 1920s and was almost bankrupted by the Wall Street crash, where with characteristic enthusiasm, he bought lots of stocks because they were going up. He decided to leave the UK and go and do a huge lecture tour in America. And he made lots of money from, he's very good at speaking and all that, so made lots of money. During that lecture tour, he got run over by a car in Fifth Avenue and suffered really quite serious injuries. But battered and bruised, he got up and carried on with his lecture tour, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that you can do is just go and do something different, and then eventually return to, like a dog to its own vomit, to what you were trying to do before. And there are various other strategies or tactics, rather, which I discuss in the book.
I'm going to try and rattle through a few more. We've got many more than 5 for the free books, and the voting's going on. But Mike Day asks, Richard, I was fascinated to read in Unreasonable Success that Jobs, Bezos, Leonardo, and others were abandoned, adopted, or suffered adversity early in their lives. Do you think this hardened their resolve to strive for unreasonable success? Congratulations on the book. He says it inspired me to reread the 80-20 principle with margin notes dated January 2000. Thanks for your contribution to shaping my personal journey. Here's to the crazy ones.
Well, he's very kind, and I think he should get the prize. Yes is the answer. I mean, I think if someone feels deserted in childhood, and perhaps, to a small degree, I did as well, the self is thrown back on itself and creates a kind of fantasy world of future success to vitiate, to overcome the barren present that they're in. I'm not saying that this is a necessary condition, but it's a very helpful one in many ways, I think. And there were, quite a few of the characters in the book, not all of them, so it's not one of the landmarks, but had, really unfortunate experiences as a young person or as a child. And I think that is, that's the sort of thing that someone who has a happy childhood, is sort of, all-round performer, does very well at school, is a head boy, head girl, or whatever, they don't stand a chance because they expect that they're going to be rewarded by conventional standards. And one of the things which I think is very important is that individualism is a rejection of the current reality. And that's why, I think there is a little link here with a free market. All of these people, in a way, were entrepreneurs. Even Lenin was an entrepreneur, trying to stimulate revolution and coming up with the idea that because there were only about 1,000 people in Tsarist Russia who ran the whole state, out of X million, tens and tens of millions, about hundreds of millions within the Russian Empire. Lenin's great insight was, why not us? If I can have a disciplined group of people doing what I tell them to do, then we can do that. We can stage basically a coup d'etat to do that. Well, that kind of insight often comes from an unfortunate experience. His unfortunate and transforming experience was his elder brother that he absolutely adored was hanged when he was 18 years old for attempting an assassination attempt on the Tsar. And before that, Lenin had been a cheerful, good, sort of, middle class, grew up in a very intellectual, happy family, and all the rest of it. After that, that was it as far as Lenin was concerned. He hated the whole of the establishment. He hated the middle classes. He hated the bourgeoisie, as he kept calling it. And that hatred propelled the extraordinary success, which unfortunately he had. So yes.
Okay. Look, we're on the hour. I'm gonna use another 5 or 10 minutes of your time, Richard, to try and plow through the questions. But we got our fifth question from Miko Overu. This is a really interesting question. This will be the fifth winner of the prize. He says, "I'm thinking of the first really popular business book, In Search of Excellence. The authors, Peters and Waterman, argued that certain characteristics made firms successful. In reality, though, after a couple of years, these excellent companies were no longer successful. Isn't it dangerous," he's suggesting to you, "to extrapolate and prescribe characteristics for success? Follow this and hey presto, the world is your oyster." I mean, are these 9 things really the roadmap to success, all the way from St. Paul on the road to Damascus to, Margaret Thatcher or Madonna? Or is it just much more disparate, random, and confusing than that?
I think that's a very good question. I think there is a difference between individuals and companies. Companies are always going to be up and down. And I think it was really naive of Peters and Waterman to actually say that this meant that this company was going to be successful forever, because it's Ecclesiastes all over again, isn't it? Sort of, there is a time and a season to everything. And there's success and failure. But the interesting thing about individuals is they can make a mark on the world, whether it's a positive mark or a negative mark, which is ineradicable. And even Hitler, who ended up being an enormous failure, had a tremendous impact. Lenin had a tremendous impact on the whole history of the 20th century. And part of Hitler's impact was actually positive because of the reaction which he caused, and the fact that people said, well, we can't let this happen again. There's the state of Israel and so on and so forth. A lot of very positive things happened, but individuals can leave a mark which is much more permanent than companies. I mean, companies are only in the business of paying dividends and rewarding shareholders by the share price going up and all the rest of it. That's not a very noble thing. Apple will always have had an impact because of Steve Jobs in terms of the devices which they provided. And it wouldn't matter if Apple went bankrupt now, because we got the iPhone, we got the iPad, we got the iPod, and all the rest of it. So I don't think they're actually comparable. But it's a very good question.
I'm going to merge 2 together. David Enright and Hugo Baker ask questions which I think we can take together. David asks, "Hi Richard, how important is the order of the experiences of the 9 landmarks? I mean, you've listed them 1 to 9. Is it optimal to experience them in that order?" And that links really to Hugo's question. In your research, does the intuition transformative experience precede the acquisition of self-belief or vice versa? Does the order matter?
No, the order doesn't. It's a very good question. I had to have some order to draw my map. But actually, I did at one stage draw separate maps for all of the people, and they're all different. So, it would have been the case that J.K. Rowling, for example, had no self-confidence, had no self-belief before the success of Harry Potter. And she had a whole series of, she was in deep depression, actually. I can't diagnose that. But all the signs were that she had a terrible, terrible time and very unfortunate experiences. And then she was a completely different person because of the success of Harry Potter. That was her transforming experience, actually. So no, the order doesn't matter. But you need a narrative in a book.
Okay, Christopher Marshall asks, you made reference to him earlier, but he didn't make your cut of 20, Richard. The question from Christopher Marshall is, to what extent has Boris Johnson achieved unreasonable success? Has he missed it, or is he still working towards it?
Well, I mean, I'm very clear on my view about Boris. I think that he will be a great prime minister, but I also think that he's incredibly incompetent. And he was a terrible foreign secretary. He's probably botched the whole handling of the virus incident, and yet, he's done some unforgettable things. That the video which he made after surviving the coronavirus I think will go down in history as, probably the best communication of a prime minister since Churchill's, we'll fight them on the beaches speech.
Wow.
I do think that the man has got what Oxford we used to call alpha gamma. And he's totally brilliant at some things. He's totally disastrous at others. But that's my whole point. If you're successful at the really important things, it doesn't really matter. No one's going to remember the fact that he was a terrible foreign secretary. If he manages to sort out, for example, if he can do something about house prices, and I know you wrote an article about this recently, if he can do something and increase the supply of housing at low prices with diversity and with the support of local communities, if he can do something about Left Behind Britain, which is a total scandal because Britain's a hugely centralized, London-centric thing, and maybe London will be destroyed by the virus, or the dominance of it will be, then he will be remembered for that. I think the man reaches for the stars. I think the man equally can appear to be a buffoon and can appear to be, not in charge of, this is what I mean by saying ordinary competence is not necessary. So I hope that I'm right about this, but you can never tell. I mean, who knows?
Okay, listen, I'm going to finish on a question, if you don't mind, Richard, about you. I gave you the full, drum roll and fireworks at the start about you're an unreasonably successful person. In fact, you confided to me the other day about how brilliant an investor you've been, that in the 37 years from 1983 to 2020, your investments have yielded a colossal annual rate of return of 22%. And I think it was Einstein who said, who's one of your 20, that compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world, and those who understand it benefit from it, and those who don't pay for it. And I was playing with some maths earlier, just because compound interest is a miracle. 22% over 37 years. If somebody invested, just starting now, £200 a month for 37 years at an annual rate of return of 22%, by the end of that 37-year period, they would have £20 million if you just saved £200 a month and invested at your rate of return. If you invested £1,000 a month for that long and you got that rate of return over 37 years, you would have £104 million at the end of it. There's the miracle of compound interest that you've been great on. I don't know whether you consider that to be the sign of your unreasonable success, but what James Campbell asks is, Richard, now having written this book and going through the process of the discovery of the 9 secrets or landmarks, when you look at your own life, is there something that you would have done differently?
Oh yes, I'd have done lots of things differently. I wouldn't have persevered in my late 20s at Boston Consulting Group when it was obvious that I was a failure there. I would have cut my losses on that. After I had had 6 very successful and very rewarding years in LEK, I drifted a bit because I didn't have a clear idea of what I was meant to do. I think the emphasis on money, I really feel conflicted about this. In some ways, I think money is more important than people realize. In some ways, I think it's totally unimportant. I don't think that the fact that I made a lot of money is actually a great achievement. It's question is, what am I going to do with money? And indeed, maybe it would, I can never spend it. I'm a real mean bastard. I don't, I travel on the tube and I ride my bicycle.
You like acquiring it, but you don't like spending it.
Exactly. I hate spending it. I'm really tight-fisted. So yes, I don't think what I would really like. I'll tell you what I really like to do, Mark. What I really like to do is train people to be unreasonably successful. And I've got a proposal for you, which in the dying seconds of this thing, I would like you and the board, the IEA, to consider. I'd quite like to do an experiment in the IEA and take some of the people in the IEA who probably at all different levels, who we think are the most creative people, and put them through an exercise of discussing with them, have you had a transforming experience? Do you have self-belief and all the rest of it? With the objective of making those people 100 times or 1,000 times more effective. Now, one effect of that may be that they decide to leave the IEA, but I don't think that matters, because you'd be able to draw other people in, because they'd say, what a fantastic place that actually it's trying to make me a lot more successful. And they would presumably do things, since most of the people who work in the IEA really do believe in free markets, for example. They do things which are free market friendly or constructive. So I'd like you to consider that, because what I'd then like to do is to do that on a bigger scale, and if a little pilot experiment in the IEA is successful, then, train other people, because there can be no limit to unreasonable success. All it will mean is that there are more creative people achieving more things, which is more beneficial to the community as large and individuals. And the people involved feel that their lives are fulfilled. That's what I'd like. That's one of the things I'd like to do anyway. But I need to define another objective. I mean, my achievement so far was to be a co-founder of LEK, which has been a great firm. It's given huge opportunity to a lot of people. It's developed, strategies for their clients, which have been, on the whole, very successful. I'm proud of that, but I'd like to do something else. So anyone who can help me with that, please let me know.
Well, I can't speak for the board. I'm merely a hired gun. I am only a reasonably successful person, not an unreasonably successful person, Richard. But I feel sure the IEA will be extremely keen to take you up on that offer. And of course, you're right. Like the aim of the IEA is not to retain the largest number of people on payroll at 2 Lord North Street, Westminster. It's to spread free market thinkers and intellectual entrepreneurs everywhere into public policy, into academia, into journalism, into teaching, and the rest of it. So I feel certain that we will be enthusiastically taking you up on that offer. We have overrun by 11 minutes. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you as always. A delight to see you virtually. I hope it's not too long before we're able to meet in person, depending on how this lockdown and pandemic actually pans out. We did have 5 winners of the most upvoted questions. My real apologies, we couldn't get to all of the questions, just timed out on that. The 5 were Daniel Verin, Miko Ariviu, Mike Day, Niskau Dungal, and Andrew Minar. You will all be receiving a copy of Richard Koch's book. If any of you are worried about how you will receive that copy, don't worry, we know where you live. Once you've registered for a Zoom webinar, we know everything about you. I've asked Alex at the back on the random number generator to generate a random number between 1 and 5, and that will get you an invitation to the Richard Koch Gala dinner, likely to be somewhere around springish 2021 in London for the next Richard Koch Essay Prize. And the number that came out was number 2. So, Miko, you will be receiving that invite as well. Thank you to everybody who's joined us for this discussion, both on the YouTube side and on the Zoom side. My particular thanks to you, Richard. Always a delight to hear from you. We probably could have gone on. We could have done a series of like 20 films about this. But thank you also for your very generous offer of training people for unreasonable success. I would be delighted to take you up on that. If you're watching us on YouTube and you've enjoyed this, please give it the thumbs up on YouTube. If you're not yet a subscriber to our channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That will mean that you get to hear about all of our upcoming broadcasts and events. Watching us on the Zoom side, still sign up to YouTube. Wherever you've been watching us in the world, please go to our website, iea.org.uk, where you can find a lot more about the book club and how you can join that. All of our blog posts and research papers are on there. And if you have been evenly modestly successful in your investments, nothing like as successful as Richard, but even modestly successful, then any donation you can make to the IEA would be greatly appreciated, and you'll certainly be able to find the donate button on our website. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's book club event. It's been an absolute pleasure to host my good friend Richard Koch. Stay in touch. We'll see you again very, very soon. Good evening, everybody. Over and out.
Thank you.